The morning sun cast long shadows across the manicured gardens of Highgrove House as King Charles III stood at his study window, his weathered hands clasped behind his back. The peaceful silence that usually enveloped his beloved estate was about to be shattered by news that would rock the very foundations of his marriage and his reign. Margaret Parker Bowles had always been the rebellious sister. While Camilla had navigated her way into the heart of the royal family with careful diplomacy and measured steps, Margaret had remained on the periphery, watching with barely concealed envy as her sister ascended to heights she could never reach. At 68 years old, Margaret had spent decades living in Camilla's shadow, and the resentment had grown like a cancer in her heart. The troubles began 3 months earlier when Margaret approached Camilla with what seemed like an innocent request. She needed a venue for a series of exclusive events, she explained, something prestigious that would attract wealthy clients to her struggling luxury catering business. Her own modest property in Wiltshire simply wouldn't suffice for the caliber of guests she hoped to impress. Camilla, ever the supportive sister despite their complicated relationship, had reluctantly agreed to help. She knew Margaret's business had been failing for years, hemorrhaging money due to poor management and Margaret's increasingly erratic behavior. Perhaps Camilla thought a helping hand might finally set her sister on the right path. The arrangement seemed simple enough. Margaret would be permitted to use certain areas of Highgrove House for small, carefully vetted gatherings. Nothing too elaborate, nothing that would attract unwanted attention. The events would be presented as exclusive countryside retreats, offering wealthy London socialites a taste of royal luxury without explicitly mentioning the royal connection. King Charles had been briefed on the arrangement, though only in the most general terms. He trusted Camilla's judgment implicitly, and the idea of helping family members in need aligned with his personal values. Besides, Highgrove had always been more than just a residence to him. It was a working estate, a showcase for his environmental initiatives and organic farming practices. A few discreet events seemed harmless enough. Margaret wasted no time in exploiting the opportunity. She began marketing her services with barely concealed hints about the royal connection, using carefully worded phrases that suggested exclusivity and prestige without explicitly mentioning the king's involvement. Her client list began to grow, attracting individuals whose motivations were not always pure. The first event took place on a crisp October evening. Margaret had convinced Camilla that she was hosting a small dinner party for agricultural investors interested in organic farming techniques. In reality, she had assembled a group of wealthy foreign nationals, many with questionable backgrounds and unclear business interests. They arrived in expensive cars, their eyes gleaming with the thrill of being inside what they believed to be an active royal residence. Margaret played the perfect hostess, regaling her guests with embellished stories about royal life and dropping hints about private conversations with the king and queen consort. She showed them through rooms that were supposed to be off-limits, pointing out personal photographs and sharing intimate details that should never have been made public. The guests ate it up, their checkbooks opening as readily as their ears. What Margaret didn't realize was that several of her guests had connections to international media outlets. Photos were being taken discreetly, conversations were being recorded, and within days, whispers began circulating in certain circles about exclusive access to royal properties. The story was too juicy to remain contained for long. Meanwhile, Charles remained blissfully unaware of the true nature of these gatherings. His busy schedule kept him away from Highgrove during most of Margaret's events, and Camilla, trusting her sister's assurances, hadn't felt the need to monitor the situation closely. The king continued his royal duties, attending state functions and working on his various charitable initiatives, completely oblivious to the storm brewing in his own backyard. The second event, held just 2 weeks later, was even more audacious. Margaret had grown bold with success, expanding her guest list and raising her fees substantially. This time, she welcomed a group that included several individuals with known ties to foreign governments, including some from countries with strained relationships with the United Kingdom. They were presented as cultural attachés and art collectors, but intelligence services would later identify at least 3 as suspected intelligence operatives. During this gathering, Margaret made her most serious mistake. Emboldened by champagne and the adulation of her guests, she led a tour through areas of the house that were strictly private, including Charles's personal study. She allowed guests to handle items from his desk, including documents that, while not classified, contained sensitive information about his private opinions on various political matters. One guest, a woman claiming to be an art dealer from Eastern Europe, showed particular interest in the king's personal correspondence. While Margaret was distracted by other visitors, this woman managed to photograph several letters and documents using a sophisticated camera disguised as a jewelry piece. These images would later surface in a complex web of international intrigue that would threaten to embarrass the crown on a global scale. The third event pushed the boundaries even further. Margaret, now drunk on her own success and the substantial fees she was collecting, decided to expand into the estate's gardens and outbuildings. She presented this gathering as an exclusive agricultural summit, but in reality, she was now essentially running unauthorized tours of royal property, complete with fabricated stories and completely invented historical anecdotes. During this event, disaster nearly struck when one of the guests, a notorious Russian oligarch's son, was recognized by a photographer who happened to be in the area covering a local environmental story. Quick thinking by Margaret's assistant managed to hustle the guest away before any photos could be taken, but the incident served as a warning that their luck might not hold forever. The money was rolling in now, and Margaret was living better than she had in years. She had moved from her modest flat into a luxury apartment in London, driving expensive cars and wearing designer clothes purchased with the proceeds from her illegal enterprise. She began to believe her own lies, convincing herself that she was simply facilitating cultural exchanges and helping to promote British heritage. Camilla began to notice changes in her sister's lifestyle, but attributed them to the success of her catering business. When she occasionally asked about the events at Highgrove, Margaret provided vague but reassuring responses, always emphasizing how grateful the guests were for the opportunity to experience British countryside hospitality. The Queen Consort, busy with her own demanding schedule of royal duties, didn't probe deeper. It was during the fourth event that the first serious security breach occurred. Margaret's guest list had grown increasingly exotic, now including individuals whose backgrounds hadn't been properly vetted. One guest, presenting himself as a Middle Eastern businessman interested in sustainable agriculture, was actually a journalist working for an international news organization known for its hostile coverage of the British royal family. This individual spent the evening carefully documenting everything he observed, from the layout of the house to the personal items visible in various rooms. He engaged Margaret in lengthy conversations about the royal family, recording her increasingly loose-tongued revelations about private family matters, personal relationships, and even details about security arrangements. The journalist's investigation would eventually reveal that Margaret had been operating her scheme for months, generating substantial illegal income, while potentially compromising national security. The story was too explosive to ignore, but the journalist wanted to ensure he had all the facts before publication. He began reaching out to other attendees of Margaret's events, slowly building a comprehensive picture of the scope and scale of the operation. Meanwhile, the fifth and final event was being planned. Margaret, now completely intoxicated by her success and the lifestyle it had afforded her, decided to go out with a bang. She planned the most elaborate gathering yet, with guests paying premium prices for what she promised would be an unforgettable experience. The invitation list included some of the most controversial figures she had yet dared to invite, including several individuals with known criminal connections and at least one person on an international watch list. This final event would prove to be Margaret's undoing, but not before it created a scandal that would reverberate through the highest levels of government and threaten to undermine public confidence in the royal family's judgment and security procedures. The stage was set for a confrontation that would tear apart not only the royal household, but also the relationship between two sisters, whose rivalry had finally crossed a line from which there could be no return. As King Charles stood at his window that morning reviewing his schedule for the day, he had no idea that within hours his private secretary would be rushing into his study with urgent news that would change everything. The carefully constructed world of royal protocol and family loyalty was about to collide with the harsh realities of greed, betrayal, and the unforgiving spotlight of international media attention. The phone call that would change everything came on a Tuesday morning in February. Sir Clive Alderton, the King's principal private secretary, had arrived at his office in Clarence House before dawn, as was his custom. The encrypted phone on his desk rang at precisely 6:30, displaying a caller identification that made his blood run cold. The head of the security service was not in the habit of making early morning social calls, Within the hour, Sir Clive found himself in a windowless briefing room deep beneath Thames House, staring at photographs and documents that painted a picture of security negligence so severe it bordered on treason. The intelligence officer across from him, a sharp-eyed woman named Director Sarah Chen, laid out the evidence with clinical precision. Margaret Parker Bowles had been under surveillance for 3 weeks. What had begun as a routine background check triggered by suspicious financial activity had mushroomed into a full-scale investigation involving multiple government departments. The evidence was damning and comprehensive. Director Chen slid a folder across the polished table. Inside were bank statements showing deposits totaling over £800,000 over the past 6 months, all linked to Margaret's previously failing business. Phone intercepts revealed conversations with individuals flagged by multiple intelligence agencies. Most disturbing of all were the photographs taken by hidden cameras during Margaret's events at Highgrove House. The images showed Margaret leading groups of unvetted foreign nationals through areas of the royal residence that contained sensitive materials. In one particularly damaging photograph, she was seen allowing guests to handle documents from the king's personal study. Another showed her posed with 3 individuals later identified as suspected intelligence operatives from hostile nations. Sir Clive's hands trembled slightly as he reviewed the evidence. The implications were staggering. Not only had national security been potentially compromised, but the reputation of the crown itself was now at risk. The investigation had already expanded beyond Margaret's activities to include a broader review of security protocols at all royal residences. The briefing continued for 2 hours, each revelation more disturbing than the last. Margaret had been selling access to royal property, essentially running an unauthorized tour operation for wealthy individuals whose loyalties to Britain were questionable at best. She had shared private family information, allowed photographs to be taken in secure areas, and potentially exposed sensitive government documents to foreign agents. But perhaps most troubling was the discovery that Margaret's activities had been noticed by international media outlets. The investigation had revealed that at least 3 major news organizations were already working on exposés about the security breaches. The story would break within days, possibly hours, unless immediate action was taken. Sir Clive left Thames House with his mind reeling. His first call was to the King's personal protection team, alerting them to the potential security implications. His second was to the Palace Communications Director, warning of an impending media storm. His third, and most difficult, was to arrange an immediate meeting with King Charles himself. The King was at Highgrove House that morning, ironically reviewing plans for a series of legitimate cultural events scheduled for later in the year. He was in his greenhouse, tending to his beloved organic vegetables, when Sir Clive's car pulled up the gravel drive. The sight of his principal private secretary arriving unannounced with a grim expression was enough to tell Charles that something serious had occurred. They met in the King's study, the very room where some of Margaret's most egregious breaches had taken place. Sir Clive laid out the evidence methodically, watching as his sovereign's expression shifted from confusion to disbelief to barely controlled rage. The King remained silent throughout the briefing, his jaw tightening with each new revelation. When Sir Clive finished, Charles rose and walked to the window overlooking his gardens. For several minutes, the only sound in the room was the ticking of an antique clock on the mantelpiece. When the King finally spoke, his voice was steady but edged with steel. The immediate priority was damage control. The security services needed to conduct a full assessment of what information might have been compromised. The palace legal team would need to review potential criminal charges against Margaret. Most importantly, Camilla would need to be informed before the story broke in the media. Finding the Queen Consort proved to be its own challenge. Camilla was in Scotland visiting a women's shelter in Edinburgh as part of her ongoing campaign against domestic violence. Her protection officers were contacted, and within the hour she was on a secure line with her husband, listening in stunned silence as he explained the situation. The conversation between Charles and Camilla was brief but emotional. The Queen Consort's first instinct was to defend her sister, suggesting there might have been some misunderstanding. But as Charles read selected excerpts from the intelligence report, her protestations grew weaker. By the end of the call, Camilla was crying quietly, the weight of her sister's betrayal settling over her like a shroud. Meanwhile, Margaret herself remained blissfully unaware that her world was about to collapse. She was at her London apartment, planning what she intended to be her most ambitious event yet. The guest list for this gathering included several individuals who had paid premium prices for what Margaret had promised would be an exclusive overnight experience at a royal residence. The plan was audacious, even by Margaret's standards. She intended to host a weekend retreat at Highgrove House, with guests staying in the estate's guest quarters and enjoying what she described as an authentic royal lifestyle experience. The fees for this event alone would have netted her over £200,000. Margaret had convinced herself that she was providing a valuable service, promoting British culture and heritage, while generating income for herself and her struggling business. In her mind, she had transformed from a failed entrepreneur into a successful cultural ambassador. The reality that she was operating an illegal enterprise that potentially endangered national security seemed not to have occurred to her. The end came swiftly and without warning. At 11:30 that morning, as Margaret was reviewing catering menus for her planned weekend event, her apartment door was answered by armed police officers. The search warrant was comprehensive, covering all of her electronic devices, financial records, and correspondence. Within hours, Margaret found herself in a secure interview room, facing questions from investigators who seemed to know more about her activities than she remembered herself. The recording devices, financial records, and detailed guest lists painted a picture of systematic criminal activity that Margaret struggled to explain away. Her initial response was indignation. She insisted that she had done nothing wrong, that she was merely hosting cultural events with her sister's permission. But as the evidence mounted, her confidence began to crack. The investigators showed her photographs of known foreign agents at her events, played recordings of her conversations revealing state secrets, and presented bank records showing the massive sums she had received from questionable sources. The interrogation continued for hours, with Margaret gradually realizing the severity of her situation. She had not simply broken protocol or violated family trust. She had potentially committed serious crimes against state security. The investigators made it clear that the charges she faced could result in significant prison time. As news of Margaret's arrest began to circulate through official channels, the palace communications team went into crisis mode. Press releases were hastily drafted, legal opinions were sought, and emergency meetings were called with senior government officials. The story would break in the media within hours, and the palace needed to be prepared with a comprehensive response. King Charles spent the afternoon in emergency meetings with his senior advisors, the heads of the intelligence services, and the Prime Minister's office. The consensus was clear. Margaret's actions had created a national security incident that required the strongest possible response. There could be no suggestion that the royal family was treating this as merely a family matter. The decision was made to take immediate and dramatic action. Margaret would be formally banned from all royal properties, stripped of any honorary titles or privileges, and cut off from all contact with the royal family pending the outcome of criminal proceedings. The king himself would make a public statement making clear the crown's position on the matter. By evening, the story had leaked to several major news outlets. The palace communications team found themselves fielding calls from journalists around the world, all seeking confirmation of rumors about a massive security breach at a royal residence. The carefully crafted press release was moved up to prevent the narrative from being controlled entirely by speculation and leaked information. As the sun set over Highgrove House, King Charles stood once again at his study window, but this time the peaceful gardens offered no comfort. The events of the day had shattered not only his trust in a family member, but also his confidence in the security systems that were supposed to protect both his family and his realm. The real consequences of Margaret's betrayal were only beginning to unfold. The story broke at exactly midnight, splashed across the front pages of 3 major international newspapers simultaneously. The headline in the Times read simply, "Royal Security Breach. King's sister-in-law arrested in espionage investigation." The accompanying photographs, taken during Margaret's illicit events, showed unmistakably foreign individuals in areas of Highgrove House that the public had never seen before. Within minutes, the story had spread across social media platforms, trending worldwide with hashtags that would dominate news cycles for weeks. #Royal Security Breach and #Highgrove Scandalgate began accumulating millions of mentions as the international media machine went into overdrive. The palace communications team, despite their preparations, found themselves overwhelmed by the sheer volume of requests for comment and clarification. King Charles was awakened at Clarence House by his duty private secretary at 2 in the morning. The media response was unlike anything the royal family had experienced since the darkest days following Princess Diana's death. News channels across the globe had interrupted regular programming to cover the breaking story, with royal correspondents and security experts providing breathless analysis of the implications. The king's first instinct was to call Camilla, but she was already awake, having been alerted by her own staff. The queen consort was at Birkhall, the couple's private residence in Scotland, and she was reportedly devastated by the scale of the media attention. Her own protection officers had advised her against leaving the estate until the initial frenzy subsided. By dawn, Highgrove House was surrounded by media vehicles and helicopters. Police had established cordons to keep journalists and curious onlookers away from the estate boundaries, but telephoto lenses captured every movement within the grounds. The king's beloved gardens, usually a private sanctuary, were now under constant surveillance by dozens of cameras. The international implications became clear as the story developed throughout the day. Foreign governments began expressing concern about the security breach, with some allies quietly questioning whether sensitive information shared with the British government might have been compromised. The French president's office issued a carefully worded statement expressing confidence in Britain's security services, but the subtext was unmistakable. More troubling were the reactions from hostile nations. State-controlled media in several countries seized upon the story as evidence of British incompetence and decline. Social media accounts linked to foreign disinformation campaigns began amplifying the most damaging aspects of the story while spreading unsubstantiated rumors about additional security failures. The political ramifications were immediate and severe. Opposition members of Parliament demanded emergency sessions to discuss the security implications. The Home Secretary found herself facing hostile questions about how such a breach could have occurred under her watch. The Director General of the Security Service was summoned to provide confidential briefings to senior government officials. Prime Minister Sunak arrived at Buckingham Palace for an emergency audience with the King at 10 o'clock that morning. The meeting, originally scheduled for 30 minutes, extended to nearly 2 hours, as the two men discussed the broader implications of the security breach. Sources later described the conversation as frank and difficult, with both leaders acknowledging the serious damage to Britain's international reputation. Meanwhile, Margaret remained in custody, her initial bravado having completely evaporated as the full scope of the investigation became clear. Her legal team, hastily assembled after her arrest, was struggling to comprehend the evidence against their client. The charges being considered ranged from violations of the Official Secrets Act to potential treason, depending on what classified information might have been compromised. The interrogation had revealed the full extent of Margaret's operation. She had not simply been hosting social events. She had been running a sophisticated intelligence-gathering operation, whether intentionally or not. The guest lists read like a who's who of international persons of interest, including suspected arms dealers, money launderers, and intelligence operatives from multiple countries. Perhaps most damaging were the recordings of Margaret's conversations during these events. Intelligence officers had compiled hours of audio in which she revealed intimate details about royal family dynamics, security procedures, and even private conversations with government officials. In one particularly damaging excerpt, she was heard speculating about the king's private political opinions regarding several international conflicts. The financial investigation had uncovered a complex web of payments that raised additional red flags. Much of the money Margaret had received had been funneled through shell companies registered in offshore jurisdictions known for their banking secrecy. Several of her clients had paid premiums far exceeding what would be reasonable for simple catering services, suggesting they were purchasing something far more valuable than dinner parties. Back at Highgrove House, forensic teams were conducting a comprehensive security assessment. Every room Margaret had accessed was being examined for listening devices, hidden cameras, or other surveillance equipment. The king's personal study was completely sealed off while experts analyzed whether any classified documents might have been photographed or copied. The investigation revealed that Margaret's security breaches were even more extensive than initially realized. She had provided her guests with detailed tours of the estate's security systems, pointing out camera locations, explaining patrol schedules, and even discussing the capabilities of the royal protection officers. This information in the wrong hands could be used to plan attacks against the royal family or to circumvent security during future visits. Queen Camilla found herself in an impossible position. As the sister of the accused, she faced questions about her own role in enabling Margaret's access to royal property. Opposition politicians and media commentators began questioning whether the queen consort had exercised proper judgment in trusting her sister with such sensitive access. The strain on Camilla was evident when she made her first public appearance since the scandal broke. Attending a previously scheduled charity event in Edinburgh, she appeared drawn and exhausted, her usual composure clearly shaken. When approached by reporters, she declined to comment on the ongoing investigation but expressed her full support for her husband and the security services. The ripple effects extended far beyond the immediate royal family. Other members of the extended Parker Bowles family found themselves under media scrutiny, with journalists digging into their backgrounds and business relationships. Several distant relatives reported being approached by reporters seeking information about Margaret's character and motivations. The security review ordered by the king was revealing systematic failures across multiple levels. Margaret's background check, conducted when she was first granted access to royal properties, had been cursory at best. Her financial difficulties and increasingly erratic behavior had gone unnoticed by those responsible for monitoring individuals with privileged access to royal residences. More concerning was the discovery that Margaret was not the only family member or friend with relatively unrestricted access to sensitive royal properties. The review identified dozens of individuals who regularly visited royal residences without undergoing proper security screening. Many were long-standing family friends or distant relatives whose loyalty had been taken for granted. The investigation also revealed troubling gaps in the monitoring of events held at royal properties. While major state occasions were subject to rigorous security protocols, smaller private events often proceeded with minimal oversight. As the week progressed, additional details continued to emerge that painted an even darker picture of Margaret's activities. Intelligence sources revealed that some of her guests had been flagged by multiple allied security services as persons of interest. The guest list for her events read like a compilation of individuals who should never have been granted access to sensitive British government facilities. The international intelligence community was now conducting its own review of the potential damage. Preliminary assessments suggested that while no classified documents appeared to have been directly compromised, the intelligence value of the information Margaret had shared was significant. Her detailed descriptions of royal family routines, security procedures, and private conversations could be valuable to foreign intelligence services seeking to understand British government decision-making processes. The king's response to the crisis was swift and decisive. In addition to the comprehensive security review, he ordered a complete overhaul of access procedures for all royal residences. New protocols would require enhanced background checks for anyone granted regular access to royal properties, regardless of their relationship to family members. But the most dramatic action was yet to come. Palace sources leaked that the king was preparing to take unprecedented steps to demonstrate the crown's commitment to national security. Margaret would not simply face criminal charges. She would be formally banished from all royal properties and stripped of any privileges associated with her family connection to the monarchy. The decision would send shockwaves through the royal family and establish a precedent for how seriously such security breaches would be treated in the future. As the scandal entered its second week, the stage was set for confrontations that would test the very foundations of royal family loyalty and the limits of forgiveness in matters of national security. The confrontation between King Charles and his sister-in-law took place in the sterile confines of a high-security government facility, far from the elegant surroundings where their family drama had begun. Margaret, now held in custody for 2 weeks, looked haggard and defeated as she was escorted into the secure meeting room, where the king waited with his legal advisors and security officials. The meeting had been arranged at Margaret's desperate request, transmitted through her legal team. She claimed to have information that could mitigate the damage she had caused, and insisted that she needed to speak directly with the king to explain her actions. What she didn't realize was that Charles had come not to listen to explanations, but to deliver an ultimatum that would sever her connection to the royal family forever. Margaret's appearance shocked those present. The once proud woman who had reveled in her access to royal circles now appeared broken, her designer clothes replaced with prison-issued clothing, her carefully maintained appearance disheveled and worn. When she began to speak, her voice trembled with a mixture of fear and residual defiance. She attempted to justify her actions by claiming she had been trying to help promote British culture and heritage to international visitors. She insisted that she had never intended to compromise national security and that she had been naive about the true intentions of some of her guests. Margaret even suggested that she had been manipulated by sophisticated intelligence operatives who had exploited her desire to help her family and her country. King Charles listened to her explanations in stony silence, his expression growing more severe with each attempted justification. When Margaret finally finished her lengthy plea for understanding, the king's response was measured but devastating. He informed her that the intelligence services had evidence suggesting her activities were far more calculated than she was admitting. The evidence was overwhelming and damning. Recorded conversations revealed that Margaret had actively marketed her access to royal properties, explicitly promising guests insider information and exclusive experiences. Bank records showed that she had negotiated different price tiers based on the level of access she could provide, with the highest fees reserved for guests seeking the most sensitive information. More troubling were communications recovered from her personal devices showing that Margaret had been in contact with several of her questionable guests for months before their visits to Highgrove House. These conversations revealed a level of premeditation that contradicted her claims of naivety and suggested that she had been fully aware of the security implications of her actions. The king presented Margaret with documents that she had never seen before. Transcripts of phone calls between some of her guests and individuals identified as foreign intelligence handlers. The calls, intercepted by British security services, revealed discussions about the information gathered during Margaret's events and plans for exploiting that intelligence for strategic purposes. One particularly damaging transcript involved a conversation between a supposed art dealer who had attended Margaret's events and an individual later identified as a senior intelligence officer from a hostile nation. The conversation included detailed descriptions of the layout of Highgrove House, the security arrangements protecting the king, and even speculation about private documents that had been observed in the king's study. Margaret's defense crumbled as the evidence mounted. Her legal team had warned her that the case against her was strong, but even they had been unaware of the full extent of the intelligence gathered by the security services. The recordings and intercepts painted a picture of a woman who had been systematically exploiting her family connections for financial gain while potentially endangering national security. The king's anger was controlled but palpable as he confronted Margaret with the consequences of her actions. The security breach had damaged Britain's relationships with allied nations, compromised sensitive information about royal protection protocols, and created a public relations disaster that would take years to overcome. The international media coverage had portrayed the royal family as careless with security and the British government as incompetent in protecting sensitive information. But perhaps most painful for Charles was the personal betrayal. Margaret had exploited the trust placed in her by Camilla, turning the queen consort's loyalty to family into a weapon against the institution she now served. The king made it clear that Margaret's actions had not only damaged national security, but had also caused profound personal pain to those who had tried to help her. The ultimatum Charles delivered was unprecedented in modern royal history. Margaret would face the full force of criminal prosecution, with no intervention or assistance from the royal family. She would be permanently banned from all royal properties and events, with violation of this ban to be treated as a serious criminal offense. Most significantly, she would be stripped of any privileges or courtesies associated with her family connection to the monarchy. The formal ban would be communicated to every royal residence, government facility, and diplomatic post worldwide. Margaret's photograph and identifying information would be added to security databases, ensuring that she could never again gain access to sensitive locations through her family connections. The message was clear. The Crown would not tolerate security breaches, even from family members. Margaret's response to the king's ultimatum was a mixture of disbelief and desperate pleading. She begged for another chance, promising to cooperate fully with the investigation and to make amends for her actions. She appealed to their family relationship through Camilla, reminding Charles of the support she had provided during the difficult early years of his relationship with her sister. The king's response was swift and final. The decision was not negotiable, and Margaret's fate was now in the hands of the criminal justice system. The royal family would provide no assistance with her legal defense, no financial support during her prosecution, and no consideration for clemency or reduced charges. She would face the consequences of her actions alone. The meeting concluded with Margaret being escorted back to her cell, her last connection to the royal family severed permanently. The king departed without looking back, his expression grim but resolute. The decision had been necessary for national security, but the personal cost was evident in his demeanor. News of the king's ultimatum leaked within hours, creating another wave of international media attention. Constitutional experts debated the precedent being set, while security analysts praised the decisive action. The message was clear to anyone with privileged access to sensitive government facilities. Betrayal would not be tolerated, regardless of family connections or social status. Queen Camilla was informed of the meeting's outcome by secure telephone while she remained in seclusion in Scotland. Sources close to the Queen Consort described her as devastated but supportive of her husband's decision. The choice between loyalty to her sister and duty to the crown had been resolved in favor of the institution she had sworn to serve. The psychological evaluation of Margaret, conducted as part of the criminal investigation, revealed a complex picture of resentment, financial desperation, and grandiose self-deception. Experts concluded that she had convinced herself that her actions were justified and beneficial, despite overwhelming evidence to the contrary. The evaluation would later play a role in her sentencing, though it would not excuse the severity of her crimes. The ripple effects of Margaret's banishment extended throughout the extended royal family and the broader aristocratic community. Other individuals with informal access to royal properties began receiving visits from security officers seeking to verify their backgrounds and current activities. The era of casual access to royal residences based on family connections or long-standing friendships was coming to an end. The international intelligence community was conducting its own assessment of the damage caused by Margaret's activities. Preliminary reports suggested that while no highly classified information had been directly compromised, the insights into royal family dynamics and security procedures could be valuable to foreign intelligence services for years to come. Several allied nations quietly requested briefings on what information might have been exposed. As Margaret faced the prospect of years in prison and permanent exile from the family that had defined her identity, the royal household was implementing comprehensive reforms designed to prevent similar security breaches in the future. The king had made it clear that protecting the crown and the nation took precedence over family loyalty, setting a precedent that would influence royal security protocols for generations to come. The stage was now set for the final resolution of the scandal that had rocked the monarchy and damaged Britain's international reputation. Margaret's criminal trial would soon begin, offering a public accounting of her betrayal and the full extent of the security damage she had caused. The royal family would need to rebuild trust with the public and with international partners, while implementing the lessons learned from this unprecedented security crisis. The trial of Margaret Parker Bowles began 6 months later at the Old Bailey, under unprecedented security arrangements that reflected the sensitive nature of the charges and the international attention focused on the proceedings. The courthouse was surrounded by armed police, while inside, a specially cleared courtroom heard evidence that would reveal the full scope of one of the most serious royal security breaches in modern British history. Margaret entered the dock looking frail and aged, her once confident demeanor replaced by the haunted expression of someone who had lost everything. The charges against her were extensive and serious: violations of the Official Secrets Act, conspiracy to compromise national security, fraud, and money laundering. Each charge carried significant prison time, and the cumulative effect could see her imprisoned for decades. The prosecution case, led by the Attorney General himself, painted a damning picture of systematic betrayal motivated by greed and resentment. Evidence presented to the jury included hours of recorded conversations in which Margaret had boasted about her royal connections and promised guests access to information and experiences that should never have been commercialized. The bank records revealed that Margaret had received over £1 million through her illegal enterprise, with payments coming from shell companies registered in offshore jurisdictions known for their banking secrecy. Financial investigators had traced the money back to individuals and organizations flagged by multiple intelligence agencies as persons of interest. The most devastating evidence came from the intelligence services themselves. In closed sessions, senior officials testified about the potential national security implications of Margaret's activities. While much of their testimony remained classified, enough was revealed to demonstrate that sensitive information about royal protection arrangements, government communications, and diplomatic procedures had been compromised. Recorded conversations between Margaret's guests and their handlers, intercepted by British intelligence, were played in court under strict security protocols. The jury heard foreign operatives discussing the intelligence value of information gathered during their visits to Highgrove House, including details about security vulnerabilities and private conversations involving senior government officials. Perhaps most shocking was evidence that Margaret had actively facilitated intelligence gathering by allowing her guests to place listening devices in sensitive areas of the royal residence. Sophisticated surveillance equipment had been discovered hidden in the king's study, the private dining room, and even guest quarters, where visiting dignitaries had stayed during official visits. The psychological evaluation of Margaret, presented as part of her defense, revealed a complex picture of someone who had been consumed by jealousy and financial desperation. Expert witnesses testified that she had developed an elaborate system of self-justification, convincing herself that she was promoting British culture while actually compromising national security for personal gain. Margaret's own testimony was the most anticipated moment of the trial. Taking the witness stand in her own defense, she presented a figure of broken defiance, alternately expressing remorse for her actions and attempting to minimize their significance. She claimed that she had been manipulated by sophisticated intelligence operatives who had exploited her desire to help her family's financial situation. Under cross-examination, however, Margaret's defense crumbled. The prosecution presented evidence of her active role in recruiting guests with questionable backgrounds, her explicit promises of access to sensitive information, and her celebration of the substantial fees she was earning through her illegal activities. Recorded conversations revealed her bragging about having outsmarted royal security and her contempt for those she perceived as having treated her as a second-class family member. The trial also revealed the broader impact of Margaret's betrayal on the royal family and the British government. Security officials testified about the massive cost of implementing new protective measures across all royal residences. Diplomatic witnesses described the damage to Britain's international relationships caused by the security breach. Queen Camilla did not attend the trial, but her written statement was read in court as part of the victim impact testimony. The Queen Consort described the profound personal betrayal she felt and the damage done to family relationships that would never fully recover. She expressed particular pain at how her attempt to help her sister had been exploited to harm the institution she had pledged to serve. King Charles also provided a written statement rather than appearing in person. His words were measured but clear in their condemnation of Margaret's actions and their impact on national security. The king emphasized that the Crown's commitment to protecting Britain's interests would always take precedence over personal or family considerations. The international media coverage of the trial was extensive and generally supportive of the royal family's handling of the crisis. Constitutional experts praised King Charles for his decisive action in banishing Margaret and cooperating fully with the criminal prosecution. The trial was seen as demonstrating the monarchy's commitment to accountability and national security. The jury deliberated for 3 days before returning guilty verdicts on all major charges. The evidence had been overwhelming, and Margaret's own testimony had only served to reinforce the prosecution's case. As the verdicts were read, Margaret showed little emotion, appearing resigned to her fate after months of legal proceedings. The sentencing hearing took place 2 weeks later, with Margaret appearing before the same judge who had overseen her trial. Character witnesses attempted to present evidence of her previous charitable work and family contributions, but their impact was limited given the severity of her crimes and their national security implications. The judge's sentencing remarks were scathing in their assessment of Margaret's actions and motivations. He described her crimes as representing a fundamental betrayal of trust that strikes at the heart of our constitutional arrangements and national security. The sentence reflected the seriousness of her offenses: 12 years in prison, with no possibility of parole, before serving at least 8 years. In addition to the prison sentence, Margaret was ordered to forfeit all assets purchased with the proceeds of her criminal activities. This included her London apartment, luxury vehicles, and expensive jewelry acquired during her months of illegal operations. The financial penalty would ensure that she derived no lasting benefit from her betrayal of the royal family's trust. The aftermath of Margaret's conviction saw continued reforms in royal security protocols. The comprehensive review ordered by King Charles resulted in new procedures for vetting anyone granted access to royal properties, regardless of their family connections or social status. Background checks became more extensive, and regular security updates were required for all individuals with privileged access. The international intelligence community also implemented new protocols based on lessons learned from the Margaret Parker Bowles case. Information sharing arrangements with allied nations were strengthened, and new procedures were established for monitoring individuals with access to sensitive diplomatic and government facilities. For the royal family, the scandal had lasting effects beyond the immediate security implications. The relationship between King Charles and Queen Camilla emerged stronger, with their handling of the crisis seen as demonstrating their commitment to duty over personal considerations. However, the extended Parker Bowles family faced years of scrutiny and suspicion as a result of Margaret's actions. Queen Camilla eventually returned to her full schedule of royal duties, though she remained visibly affected by her sister's betrayal for months after the conviction. Public sympathy for her position helped maintain support for the monarchy during a difficult period, and her dignified handling of the crisis enhanced her standing with both the media and the public. The precedent established by King Charles in dealing with Margaret's betrayal sent a clear message throughout the royal household and the broader aristocratic community. Family connections would no longer provide protection from the consequences of serious misconduct, and the security of the realm would always take precedence over personal loyalty. Margaret Parker Bowles began serving her sentence at a high-security women's prison, where she would spend the better part of the next decade. Her name was permanently added to security databases worldwide, ensuring that she would never again be able to exploit family connections for personal gain or to compromise sensitive information. The Highgrove estate, scene of Margaret's most serious security breaches, underwent extensive renovations and security upgrades following her conviction. The king's beloved gardens were enhanced with state-of-the-art surveillance systems, and access protocols were completely overhauled. When the estate eventually reopened for limited public tours, the new security arrangements served as a visible reminder of the lessons learned from the scandal. As the years passed, the Margaret Parker Bowles affair became a case study in royal security and family loyalty. Constitutional scholars debated the precedents established by King Charles's decisive action, while security experts praised the comprehensive reforms implemented in response to the crisis. The scandal had tested the monarchy's resilience and commitment to national security, and the institution had emerged stronger and more secure as a result. The final chapter of the saga came years later when Margaret, having served her full sentence, was released from prison as a broken and largely forgotten figure. Her banishment from royal properties remained in effect, and she lived out her remaining years in obscurity, a cautionary tale about the consequences of betraying the trust of both family and nation. The woman who had once reveled in royal connections died alone and unmourned, her legacy forever tied to one of the most serious security breaches in modern royal history.